He hated Jerry Seinfeld very much. We now understand why. Johnny Carson, host of the legendary Tonight Show, was the undisputed king of late-night TV for 30 years. He was known for his charm, wit, and genuine respect for funny people. Carson helped many people get their start in show business with just a nod and a call to the couch. Carson loved a lot of comedians, but Jerry Seinfeld was the only one he never liked. Carson's support was very important during the best years of TV. Giving an unknown artist a thumbs up from Johnny could make them famous. Became a well-known name overnight. But behind the scenes of the entertainment industry's most powerful family, Carson had a deep dislike for the man who would become the best-paid comedian on TV. Many Americans loved having Seinfeld in their living rooms every Thursday night, but the man who created late-night TV couldn't stand him. Let's look behind the scenes at one of the most interesting unspoken feuds in Hollywood, the Cold War between TV's most powerful power broker and the comic who said he would make a show about nothing. What could have made Carson dislike one of the biggest names in comedy? Was it something personal, something business, or something much darker? The answer tells you a lot about both guys and how the entertainment business works when the cameras are off. When you're done with this movie, you'll know why the man who helped many comedians become famous never gave Seinfeld his blessing and why that's more important than you might think. Pay attention, because what I'm about to tell you will shock you more than anything else you've heard. It's me, Jerry Seinfeld. Hey, Jeannie Steinman. Hi, Sam. The friendship between Seinfeld and 17-year-old Shoshana Lonstein. This was 1993, and Jerry Seinfeld was at the height of his success. Thursday nights were all about Seinfeld. He was laughed at by many, and at 38 years old, he had more power in Hollywood than most actors could ever dream of. That's when he met Shoshana Lonstein in Central Park. She was 17 years old and went to the famous Dalton School. What started out as a chance meeting quickly turned into a relationship that made people all over America look twice. Seinfeld said they were just friends until Shoshana's death. After their 18th birthday, they were often taken together in private places. Even though they were 21 years apart in age, she couldn't legally drink while he was getting close to 40. Seinfeld didn't seem to notice that people were uncomfortable. For Johnny Carson, this was way too much. Someone who worked on the last few years of The Tonight Show said Johnny was very traditional about some things, and this was too much for him. He made a living by being the kind of artist that parents knew they could trust and who stood for a certain class. He thought it was rude and embarrassing for a middle-aged guy to date a high school student. Carson, who was in his late 60s and nearing the end of his career at the time, allegedly wouldn't even talk about Seinfeld's relationship on air. When a monologue joke about the couple didn't go over well with the crowd, Carson told his writers to take out any more references to Seinfeld's personal life. A former NBC official who worked closely with Carson said that Johnny put up with a lot. But a 38-year-old woman meeting a 15-year-old wasn't one of them. He came from a time when there were unspoken rules about how famous people should act. It broke all of them to date someone young enough to be your daughter, especially someone who was still in high school. Even major news outlets couldn't ignore how uncomfortable the relationship was. As a direct reference to the 1967 movie The Graduate, which is about an older woman seducing a young guy fresh out of college, People magazine had a cover story called The Graduate. Newsweek said the relationship was awkward and asked why someone as successful and mature as Seinfeld would follow someone so young. There was Seinfeld. Lonstein and he broke up after 4 years together, but the damage to his image in some places was already done. And in Johnny Carson's world, where manners, class, and a certain moral code were still important, Seinfeld had shown that he wasn't really a gentleman. Carson was asked about Seinfeld years later in a rare interview after he had retired. He simply said, "Some comedians understand that with great success comes great responsibility. Others just understand success." It was clear what he meant. You watch TV and think about everything the guy does. Oh, well, he's a cab driver. I'm sure he knows what he's doing. You don't think about how cocky and cold Seinfeld was when he wasn't on camera, hiding behind his famous grin and "what's the deal with?" People say that the real Jerry Seinfeld was not at all like the one that Americans watched every week on TV. People who worked with him said he was scientific, cold, and often rude to others, even though his observational comedy struck a chord with millions. Carson, on the other hand, the kind of person who genuinely thanks the people who make his show possible. Even though Johnny was very famous, he would learn the names of his stagehands, ask about their families, and genuinely care about the people around him. Carson kept a fairly realistic view of things, even though he had reached the peak of his TV career. A longtime Tonight Show writer who later worked with Seinfeld said that Johnny never forgot that TV was a way for people to work together. He knew that a lot of other people had to do their jobs well for him to succeed. Jerry, on the other hand, always seemed like he was just there to help everyone. By being there. When Seinfeld went on The Tonight Show, people backstage could see how different the two men's styles were. Seinfeld, on the other hand, was always polite, on time, and ready. He didn't talk to or thank staff members very often, and he kept what one crew member called an invisible wall between himself and everyone else. It was seen by Carson. Carson had hosted thousands of famous people over the course of 30 years, and Seinfeld's behavior stood out. It wasn't because he was rude, but because he lacked the warmth and humility that Carson respected. A former Tonight Show writer said, Johnny liked comedians who had layers. He liked sharp wit, but he also liked being honest, humble, and able to laugh at yourself. Jerry had the wit, but not so much the rest. This became painfully clear during a discussion about other comedians, including Carson favorites like David Letterman and Jay Leno, who were seen as trying too hard to connect with audiences by Seinfeld. People in the crowd laughed at Seinfeld's usual snark, but people in the green room saw Carson's tight smile. One witness said, the audience laughed, but the green room stayed silent. Everyone knew Johnny hated that kind of talk. Carson had built his empire on the idea that talent should speak for itself. He thought that self-congratulation and putting down peers were signs of insecurity rather than confidence. For someone who had made it through 30 years in the tough world of TV without making enemies, Seinfeld's way of dealing with his co-workers seemed too harsh. Johnny once told me that the sign of a truly great leader was, the great comedian will be in Vienna, Virginia, from August 16th to August 18th, and on August 25th. Would you welcome and quickly Jerry Seinfeld? Other comedians want to be around them, recalled comedian Gary Chandling years later with Jerry. That wasn't always the case, though. Carson valued modesty, while Seinfeld showed off his wealth. Few things showed how different Carson and Seinfeld were than their views on success and wealth. According to Hollywood standards, Johnny Carson lived a pretty simple life during his broadcasting career. He gave little and kept his lifestyle low-key, and his public persona never revolved around his huge wealth. His longtime producer, Peter Lasully, remembered that Johnny drove nice cars and had beautiful homes, but he never talked about them because he thought that was the fastest way to lose touch with his audience. Seinfeld, on the other hand, built a lot of his post-Seinfeld identity around his wealth. Carson was incredibly wealthy. His collection of over 100 Porsches became famous, and his private jet travel became normal. His $100 million a year from Seinfeld syndication was talked about openly in interviews. Instead of playing down his wealth, Seinfeld seemed to enjoy it, building whole shows around it, like comedians in cars getting coffee. Carson didn't like this attitude toward money in modern celebrity culture. He grew up in Nebraska during the Great Depression and had a Midwestern view of it throughout his life. He fought hard for his pay at NBC and became the highest-paid entertainer in TV history, but he thought it was rude to talk about money in public. Johnny once told one of the writers on our staff, "You don't get funnier when your garage gets bigger," said a former Tonight Show staff member. He thought comedy came from struggle, observation, and living a normal life. When he heard about Jerry's car collection and how often he talked about his money, he just shook his head. Carson looked up to great comedians like Jack Benny, George Burns, and Bob Hope because they all came from humble beginnings and kept an everyman quality despite their success. To Carson, that connection with everyday life was what made great comedy. Seinfeld's approach felt foreign to Carson, and it was a sign of how the entertainment industry was changing, with celebrities using their wealth as part of their brand more and more. Younger audiences might have found Seinfeld's lavish lifestyle interesting. To Carson, it meant losing touch with the people who had helped him become successful. People can tell when you've lost touch with real life, and Carson once told his longtime partner Ed McMahon, "And when that happens, you stop being funny." You have a lot of money. There was no worse criticism for a man who loved comedy more than anything else. Well, I'm here, we're all here, and you're here. I think that's important because Seinfeld made fun of Carson's talk show style. For 30 years, Johnny Carson. Carson made the monologue, the desk, the couch, and the interviews into works of art that Letterman, Leno, and many others would use as models. When Jerry Seinfeld started his own interview show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, in 2012, he made it clear that it was different from Carson's style and a more modern way to talk to celebrities. I don't want to talk to actors about their roles, he said. In several promotional interviews, Seinfeld said, I'm not interested in that fake enthusiasm, that pretend interest. That's why Comedians in Cars is the only show worth doing. It's real. Seinfeld never mentioned Carson by name, but it was clear to people in the comedy business that he thought Carson's traditional talk show, Carson's innovation and legacy, was out of date, fake, and not worth a real comedian's time. Johnny took that personally, said a close friend of Carson who kept in touch with Carson after he retired. He basically said that Johnny's whole life's work wasn't real because he wasn't on The Tonight Show. Of course, this made Johnny angry. Carson was known for being very sensitive to slights and very protective of his legacy. He was reportedly hurt by Seinfeld's attitude toward the format he had spent his whole life perfecting. For Carson, the talk show wasn't just entertainment, it was a conversation with America every night that had seen the country through assassinations, wars, scandals, and successes. A former